Today on Ancient DOS Games, we're doing Star Wars Dark Forces, a game that, despite its popularity, was frequently pegged as being too similar to Doom. Now, I don't get that. It's like, there were already a cornucopia of first-person shooters when this one came out, and this one has so many features that Doom doesn't. Well, why would you not play a game just because it was similar to some other game? I've never understood that kind of logic, and besides, today's game was one of the first requests I got for a game that I happen to own already. So I figured, let's give it a go, see where we end up. Now let's see some game stats. Dark Forces was both developed and published by LucasArts in 1995. It's a one-player first-person shooter sporting VGA 320x200 256 color graphics. It supports multiple sound and music cards, and I recommend the Sound Blaster setting for the sound, though if you choose the advanced setting in the setup program, you can actually select the music and sound cards independently, and depending on the kind of system you have, selecting general MIDI for the music might actually make the music sound better. And as for its release date, it's still commercial, but finding a copy is dead simple. You can either take advantage of download services like Steam or Direct to Drive and pay about $5, or you can easily find the game disc by itself at places like eBay or Amazon for just $1 or $2. Granted, then you have to pay shipping too. Or if you want it all, like the box, manuals, etc., then you probably spend closer to $15 to $20. Suffice to say, this game's really simple to get. Now I have to admit, even though I've owned this game for many years now, I haven't really played it much. The main reason is because of the serious time commitment this game demands. Unlike almost every other first-person shooter made in the 90s, this one doesn't offer mid-level saving. And considering how massive the levels are, this means if you want to go through a mission, you gotta do it all in one go. And if you run out of extra lives, you have to do the entire thing over. For this reason, I didn't actually have enough time to capture all the game footage I wanted for this episode. Though I'm pretty sure I got enough to show a good variety of the gameplay. Actually, another one of my pet peeves with this game are the weapons. Now, not counting your fists, you actually get 9 different weapons you can use, some of which have an alternate firing mode. There's just one problem. 5 of these 9 weapons are capable of doing damage to yourself. That's simply insane. Self-damaging weapons should not be the prevailing type of weapon in any game. Well, okay, except maybe for Bomberman, but you get my point. It's difficult to progress through a game with no mid-level saving when half of your weapon inventory is capable of hurting you. Anyways, those are the main reasons why I've never sat down and tried to beat this thing. It probably doesn't help either that I'm not a huge Star Wars fan, but I certainly know a good share of the lore. For instance, this game, Dark Forces, introduces the character of Kyle Katarn, arguably one of the most famous characters in Star Wars lore who wasn't conceived in the movies. Now you start the game on a mission to steal the original Death Star plans and deliver them to the Rebel Alliance. That way Star Wars Episode 4 can take place. Okay, that's not the in-universe explanation, but you know what I mean. Following this mission begins the real bulk of the game, though. Apparently, after the destruction of the Death Star, the Galactic Empire has started unleashing these new soldiers known as Dark Troopers, which are apparently super powerful and deadly. So your quest is to find out more about the Dark Trooper project, and ultimately grind it to an abrupt and permanent halt. Now, the interesting thing about this game is that... Wait, you guys hear that? What is that? No, seriously, what is that noise? Really, where is that noise coming from? Okay, that was seriously weird. What was I talking about before that happened? Oh yeah, the game engine. One of the interesting things about this game is that the game engine is actually a combination of 2 engines working in tandem. One engine provides the level geometry based on 2D sectors joined together with floor and ceiling heights. The other allows for full 3D polygon objects, but has very limited collision detection, so can only really be used for decorative purposes or small things like laser blasts. This does help a tiny bit to pull the game away from its similarities to Doom, but I think what helps more than that is your inventory. You see, besides your weapons, you get a selection of items you can use to help you out. For instance, you start the game with a headlight that helps light up dark areas around you at the cost of battery power, which is what those 5 little pips above your weapon ammunition are for. Beyond that, you can also find infrared goggles, which illuminate the area around you to some extent, though I find they work best for spotting things that generate heat, such as living creatures and landmines. Though you can also find ice cleats, which let you walk normally over ice, which is kind of a gimmick thing, but whatever. And you can also pick up a gas mask, which lets you breathe in toxic environments, which again is kind of a gimmick thing. Well, at least there's a good variety with the weapons, even if there are a lot of them that can hurt you when you use them. You know, I want a ticker in that corner as I go through the weapons. A ticker which counts how many of the weapons cause self-damage. There we go. Now whenever I count a weapon that happens to be capable of hurting you in the process of using it, that number shall increase. Now, I'm going to go through the weapons in the order that you normally get them in. I don't actually know if you can get certain weapons before others, but whatever. Let's just go through them in order. Now, technically, the first weapon you get are your fists, but I don't really generally count fists as a weapon because, quite frankly, in most 90s first-person shooters, weapon number 1, usually your fists, is always your desperation weapon, because you never ever use it unless you manage to waste all of your ammunition and are pretty much guaranteed to die anyways. So that means the first weapon you get is the modified Breyer pistol. Now, it's a fairly simple but nearly useless weapon because it does very little damage and has a slow rate of fire. Though right at the start of the game, you're going to replace that thing really quickly with the Stormtrooper rifle, which isn't actually very precise despite anything Obi-Wan might tell you, but it is surprisingly effective despite its poor accuracy, and you're going to be using this weapon a lot early in the game. Next comes the thermal detonators, which are the equivalent of grenades, and like any good grenades, they explode, which means you can hurt yourself with them if you're not careful. The one good thing about the grenades is that you can either throw them so that they explode on impact, or you can use your alternate firing button to throw them and have a short delay before they explode. And I actually recommend that you use that method of throwing them simply for the fact that it's really hard to aim these things and you don't want to just throw it like a few centimeters in front of you, because if you just tap the button, that's what's going to happen. So yeah. Next is the Imperial repeater rifle, which is both accurate and rapid and also has a triple fire mode for extra damage. Definitely a good weapon, but the ammo for it's going to be really scarce early on, so you're probably going to want to save it for later levels. Then comes the Jaron fusion cutter, which is a dual-purpose weapon actually. Its primary firing mode is good for taking out large, slow-moving targets, but not small, fast-moving ones. But that's where its alternate firing comes in, because if you have a group of targets in the area, then the cutter's alternate firing mode will fire all 4 of its barrels at a time, spreading damage over a large area and making it simple to take out groups of enemies. So it's definitely another good weapon. Next are the IM mines, which are obviously landmines, and they obviously explode under the right conditions, and explosions obviously hurt you if you're too close to them. Actually, the IM mines have very limited use since the enemies don't really like to follow you that much, and instead they just wander all over the place. Anyways, next is the Packard mortar gun, which fires devastating mortar shells that are tricky to aim because of their limited range, and of course they have a massive explosion on impact. Next up is the Stoker Concussion rifle, which is a very powerful weapon, but it's kind of weird because the shots fired by it are invisible. This makes it extremely hard to effectively dodge enemies which use this weapon, and since the shots chain react with nearby targets on impact, you can't really use it at close range unless you want to lose some health in the process. And finally, there's the Assault Cannon, which is another dual-purpose weapon. Unfortunately, I don't have any gameplay footage of it, but basically it has 2 firing modes. Its standard firing mode shoots large pulses of energy which do really good damage, and its alternate firing mode actually has its own source of ammunition that fires missiles which don't move very fast, but rest assured, they will hurt whatever they hit, including yourself. Actually, I think I'm finally beginning to understand the ire some people have for this game. Like, I mean, it does do a ton of things differently than typical first-person shooters at the time, but many of the things it does differently, it doesn't exactly do well. Like, I mean, too many self-damaging weapons, no mid-level saving, even the auto map has issues, because the auto map relies on this sort of layering system, and sometimes the layers actually interfere with each other. Not so much by overlapping, but by overriding the other layers, meaning certain parts of the level disappear when you're in other parts of it. And this makes it difficult to determine exactly where you are sometimes. Not to mention there's no multiplayer either. Now don't get me wrong, it's not like Dark Forces is a bad game. Like, I mean, there's a lot of variety with the missions. It's not just go in and kill everything, and the music is pretty good, and the graphics are really good for a game like this. It's just, it has this feel like this is sort of like LucasArts testing the water, seeing if Star Wars fans wanted a first-person shooter. And obviously they did, because a lot of people bought this game. The thing is that those fans also wanted lightsabers, they wanted force powers, and of course they wanted multiplayer. So this game didn't provide those, but the sequel certainly did a much better job of it. But, you know, I guess every game has to start somewhere, right? Anyways, let's talk about the optimal settings for Dosbox this time around, because it's actually really simple. Just set your cycles count to max and leave the graphics filters off, and the game should run perfectly fine. And also, because of the limited amount of stuff you can do with the mouse in this game, I actually recommend playing the game with a gamepad, if you happen to have one. And you can always use Dosbox's key mapper to just make that gamepad work its best. And lastly, for those of you who own the game on CD, you need to have access to the CD in order to play the game. So you can either mount your actual CD in Dosbox, but if you want a much better loading times for this game, simply make an ISO of your CD and image mount the ISO file in Dosbox. And also, using that approach, you can get away with doing a minimal install of the game, since all the files will be loaded from the image file anyways. And that's all I got to say about Dark Forces, so stay tuned for episode 17 of Ancient DOS Games, where I'm going to be covering an old miniature golf game that happens to have a very straightforward name. In fact, the name is so simple you probably don't even have to know what game I'm talking about to guess it right. So send your guesses to adg@pixelships.com and check back next Saturday to see if you got it right.